The conference room on the 40th floor had a view most people only saw in magazines. Blast towers folding into a bruised orange sunset, the city humming quietly below like it already knew who owned it. Julian Sterling sat at the head of a table made from a single slab of black walnut, a pen in his hand worth more than most people's monthly rent, and in front of him sat the single most important document of his career. $2.3 billion. 18 years of work. One signature away from becoming the deal that would put his name in every business textbook printed for the next decade. He liked to imagine his father watching this moment. The old man had died broke, blaming the world for it. Julian had spent nearly 2 decades proving the world wasn't the problem, you just had to be smarter than everyone in the room. Tonight, in a room full of lawyers and board members and men who called him visionary to his face and something far less flattering behind his back, he was about to prove it one final time. His pen touched paper, and that's when the door opened. It wasn't supposed to open. Security didn't let cleaning staff onto the executive floor during board sessions. Everyone in that room knew the rule, which was exactly why every head turned when a woman in a gray uniform stepped through the doorway, a cart of supplies forgotten behind her, her eyes locked on Julian like nothing else in the room existed. Don't sign that. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Something about the stillness in it cut clean through the low murmur of very important men clearing their throats in irritation. I'm sorry. Who let her in here? The general counsel, a sharp-suited man named Prescott, was already rising from his chair. 20 seconds, the woman said, still looking only at Julian. That's all I'm asking. Then I'll walk out and you can call security yourself. Julian should have said no. Every instinct built over 18 years of boardrooms told him to have her escorted out and get back to the signature that would define his legacy. But there was something in the way she held herself, not nervous, not desperate, but certain, the way people are certain when they've spent a long time. The way people are certain when they've spent a long time deciding whether telling the truth is worth the cost. He set the pen down. Everyone out. 2 minutes. The room emptied in a storm of confused whispers. When the door finally clicked shut, it was just the two of them, the billionaire and the janitor, standing on opposite ends of a table that cost more than her yearly salary.
My name is Solene, she said. I've cleaned this floor for 3 years, long enough to hear things I wasn't supposed to hear, and read things left open on desks I wasn't supposed to read. She reached into her uniform pocket and set a folded, water-stained page on the table. That merger isn't what they've told you it is. There's a second agreement, one that transfers controlling interest out of your name within 90 days of signing, buried inside a subsidiary clause nobody on your side has actually read line by line. I think it was drafted by someone you trust. I think it's been sitting in a locked drawer for months, waiting for tonight. I know, Solene said quietly. I also know what it costs a person like me to say it out loud in a room like this. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to read it before you sign anything else. Then she picked up her cart and walked out, leaving him alone with a folded page and a pen he no longer wanted to pick up.
He didn't sleep that night. By 3 a.m., Julian sat alone in his penthouse office, the folded page spread across his desk beside 2 decades of merger paperwork he suddenly wasn't sure he'd ever actually read closely. The clause Celine described was there, buried on page 41, wrapped in language dense enough that 100 lawyers could have skimmed past it without blinking. A subsidiary restructuring agreement, a 90-day trigger, a name he recognized instantly because he'd hired that man himself 11 years ago and made him one of the most powerful executives in the company. Marcus Whitfield, his chief operating officer, the closest thing to a brother Julian had left in the world. He spent the next 4 days doing something he hadn't done in years, working quietly, alone, without an assistant, without his usual armor of lawyers and advisors. He requested old financial filings under a false project name. He cross-referenced shell companies buried 3 layers deep in the merger's supporting documents. Each discovery peeled back another piece of something far larger and far colder than a single bad clause. Wire transfers routed through accounts with no obvious purpose, board minutes quietly amended after the fact, a private equity partner on the other side of the deal who, it turned out, had once been business partners with Whitfield a decade before either of them ever set foot in Julian's company. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight buried in legal language by accident. It was a plan. 18 years in the making, hiding in plain sight behind every trust me and every late night drink and every birthday Whitfield had shown up to with a gift for Julian's kids. The hardest part wasn't uncovering the truth. It was deciding what to do with it. Julian could have gone straight to the board, exposed everything, and let the lawyers tear the whole conspiracy apart in public. It would have been fast. It would have been satisfying. It also would have handed Whitfield and his partners enough warning to cover their tracks, move the money, and disappear into the kind of legal gray area that swallows justice whole. So instead, on the night of the rescheduled signing, Julian did something nobody in that boardroom expected. He walked in early. He shook Whitfield's hand like nothing had changed, and when the documents were laid out again, the same $2.3 billion promise, the same hidden clause on page 41, he calmly asked every person in the room to explain, on record, exactly what that clause meant. Nobody could answer without contradicting themselves. Prescott stumbled. The private equity partner grew pale, and Whitfield, the man who had built 11 years of trust brick by brick, simply stopped talking because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't confirm everything Julian already knew. The deal collapsed within the hour. The investigation that followed took considerably longer. 3 months later, Julian stood in the lobby of the same building, waiting by the front doors long after most of the staff had gone home for the night. When Celine came down from the executive floor, cart in hand, uniform slightly wrinkled from a long shift, she stopped short at the sight of him.
I'm not signing anything tonight, he said, before she could ask. I just wanted to say thank you. Properly, this time, not in a boardroom with security waiting outside the door. She studied him for a moment, the same steady, unreadable calm she'd worn the night she walked in uninvited. You didn't have to lose a friend to learn who you could trust. No, Julian admitted. But I did. And it turns out the person who told me the truth was the one person I had every reason to walk past every single day and never actually see.
He offered her something then, not charity, not a token gesture, but a newly created position on the company's internal ethics and compliance team, built specifically around the instincts that had saved his company and, quite possibly, his life. She didn't answer right away. People who have spent years being overlooked don't trust sudden visibility easily, and Julian, for the first time in a long while, was willing to wait for an answer instead of demanding one. I'll think about it, Celine finally said. It wasn't a yes. But for a man who had almost signed away everything he'd built without ever asking a single hard question, it felt like the truest kind of beginning, the kind built not on legacy or ambition, but on finally learning to listen to the one voice in the room he
She didn't answer right away. People who had spent years being overlooked rarely trusted sudden visibility, and Julian, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, understood that some decisions deserved patience instead of persuasion. I'll think about it. It wasn't a yes. It wasn't a no. It was simply the first honest answer anyone had given him in weeks. Julian watched her disappear through the revolving doors, pushing the same cleaning cart she'd arrived with 3 years earlier. The lobby swallowed her into the evening crowd almost immediately. Business executives hurried past without noticing her, just as they always had. Only now he couldn't understand how he'd been one of them. For 18 years he'd built companies by identifying talent, reading balance sheets, predicting markets, and making decisions worth billions of dollars. Yet somehow he'd walked past one of the most observant people he'd ever met almost every weekday without learning her name. That realization bothered him far more than Whitfield's betrayal ever could. Because betrayal required trust. Ignoring someone required something worse. Indifference. For the next several days, Julian found himself doing something that would have seemed absurd only a month earlier. He started arriving at the office before sunrise. Not because there were meetings to prepare for or investors to impress. Those had always begun much later in the morning. The building, at that hour, belonged to an entirely different world, a world he had never bothered to notice. The elevators opened onto quiet hallways instead of crowded corridors. The polished marble floors reflected rows of ceiling lights that hadn't yet been dimmed by daylight. Somewhere in the distance,
the steady hum of industrial vacuum cleaners echoed softly through the empty executive suites, accompanied by the occasional clink of a bucket against stainless steel. It was the sound of an office becoming invisible again. For 18 years, Julian had believed the workday began when executives walked through the front doors carrying leather briefcases and expensive coffee. He was beginning to realize that someone else's workday had already been underway for hours before the first board member checked their watch. One morning, as the clock on the lobby wall crept toward 6, he saw her. Celine pushed her cleaning cart through the reception area with the same quiet confidence she'd carried into his boardroom that evening. She wasn't rushing, nor was she moving slowly. There was a rhythm to her work, almost deliberate, as though every polished surface and every empty office deserved the same care whether anyone noticed or not. She hadn't seen him yet. Julian stayed where he was, watching from across the lobby. Employees often imagined they understood the people who worked around them. The truth was, most of them only understood job titles. For the first time, he was watching a person instead of a position. A security guard greeted her by name before she greeted him first. Morning, Celine. Morning, Frank. How's your granddaughter? The older man smiled immediately. Started school yesterday. I told you she'd do well. They spoke for less than 30 seconds before each continued with their work, yet the exchange lingered with Julian long after it ended. She knew the names of people he had barely noticed in years. The maintenance engineers, the reception staff, the overnight security team, even the florist who replaced arrangements in the lobby every Tuesday morning stopped to chat with her for a few moments before wheeling a cart of fresh lilies toward the elevators. Everyone seemed genuinely pleased to see her. That surprised him more than it should have. Influence, he had always assumed, belonged to the people whose names appeared on office doors. Standing quietly beside a marble column, he was beginning to understand that respect often belonged to entirely different people. When Celine finally noticed him, she paused. For the briefest moment, genuine surprise crossed her face. I wasn't expecting to see you here this early. Julian smiled faintly. I'm beginning to think I've been arriving far too late. She glanced toward the empty reception desk before looking back at him. And now? Now I think I've been running a company I never fully understood. She studied him for a moment, searching his expression as though deciding whether he truly meant it. I hope this isn't because of me. It is, Julian replied honestly. But not in the way you think. She folded the cloth she'd been holding and rested it neatly on top of her cart. I only told you the truth. I know. And you offered me a job. I did. She nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about it. I assumed you had. I haven't decided. Julian wasn't disappointed. If anything, her hesitation confirmed everything he'd begun to learn about her. People who chased opportunity usually answered immediately. People who had been disappointed enough times learned to examine every door before walking through it. I don't expect an answer today, he said. I know. There was an awkward silence, not uncomfortable, simply unfamiliar. Neither of them seemed interested in filling it with meaningless conversation. Finally, Celine spoke. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you really here? It was a fair question. The version of Julian Sterling the business world knew would never wake before dawn simply to watch a cleaning crew begin another shift. He looked around the empty lobby before answering. For most of my career, I believed success meant surrounding myself with the smartest people in the room. It usually helps. It does. He smiled quietly. The problem is I only looked for them in boardrooms. For the first time since they'd met, Celine laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't rehearsed. It was simply honest. And somehow, that single laugh felt more genuine than 1,000 standing ovations Julian had received over the course of his career. Neither of them noticed the receptionist walking through the front entrance just then. She stopped for a second, surprised to find the company's billionaire CEO standing beside the morning cleaning cart, talking so naturally with the woman most executives walked past without a second glance. By lunchtime, half the building had heard about it. By the end of the afternoon, the stories had already begun to change. Some said Julian was investigating the cleaning staff. Others insisted Celine had become his personal advisor overnight. Nobody came close to the truth, because the truth was much simpler. For the first time in 18 years, Julian Sterling had stopped long enough to have a conversation with someone whose name had never appeared on an organizational chart. And without realizing it, that conversation had already begun changing him in ways no billion-dollar deal ever had. For more beautiful stories such as this, kindly like, comment, and subscribe on our page. Like that you don't have to look for us, we come to you. See you in our next story.